Hi, everybody. My name is Alyssa Malaspina, and I'm the chairperson of the ISTE Librarians Network. And today I'm so excited because we have two amazing guests on. We have Tiffany Whitehead and Jenn Hanson, and they're going to talk about their experiences traveling abroad and learning about different libraries and librarian networks throughout Europe. They've both gone on some amazing trips to all these cool places that now I want to go to. So they're going to talk to us and maybe show us some pictures of their experiences. So I'm really excited to have them join us tonight. So, Tiffany, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I am Tiffany Whitehead. I am the librarian at Central Middle School in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And in November, I was lucky enough to take a trip to Belgrade, Serbia, where I spoke at the International Schools Conference for librarians in Central and Eastern Europe.
That sounds amazing. Just sounds absolutely awesome. And so you're going to tell us more about that in a little bit. And then Jenn, would you like to introduce yourself to everybody?
Sure. I'm Jennifer Hanson. I am the librarian at a nonprofit just outside of Boston called Primary Source. I've been there for 8 years, and we do professional development opportunities for teachers and librarians. So part of my job is that I sometimes, occasionally, maybe once every 3 years, get the opportunity to go on a teacher study tour. And so I've been twice to China. This past fall in September, I got to go on the Massachusetts education delegation to Helsinki, Finland, and London, England. So I think I got to visit about 5 or 6 libraries during that trip. So I'll be talking about that a little bit later.
Yay, I'm so excited. Okay, so do you guys, I mean, as you see, we rehearsed this totally beforehand. Tip, would you like to start by telling us a little about your trip to Serbia and sort of what you did and about the conference itself? I'm really intrigued by that whole idea of the international conference, especially, I'd love to know more about sort of all the countries that were involved in it and that whole thing and how you, from Louisiana ended up at this conference.
Yeah, so it was really kind of crazy. I've been doing speaking for a couple of years now at different state and local conferences. But I got an email from the librarian at the International School of Belgrade, and they were hosting the CISA conference, which is the Central and Eastern European Schools, the International Schools Organization. And so it was a very small conference. They had librarians, and then they also had elementary school principals that came together from international schools in Eastern Europe. So they had a librarian from Moscow, from Sofia, from they had some from Turkey, just all over the place in that area. It was only like maybe 7 or 8 librarians that came together, but when you think about it, we feel isolated. I know I feel isolated in my library pretty often, but for them being at an international school, so an American and English-speaking school in a foreign country, it was a really cool opportunity for them to come together and have some professional development. And so that's what I did. I did some sessions on them on using technology in the library, and also on ditching Dewey, which is the thing that I like to talk about very often. But it was really cool to talk to them, and most of them are Americans who are teaching for a period of several years at an international school in Europe. So it was very interesting for me. I knew nothing about the international school situation when I went over there, so I learned a lot. It's really cool. We got to tour the school in Belgrade. One day when we were there, they actually had students, so we got to see kind of the school in action. But for the most part, the international schools, they're pretty small, a couple of hundred students. They have some local students, but they also have students who are Americans, whether their parents are like ambassadors that are living in that country, or their parents may be business people who are working internationally and their families come and live with them. So it's a really interesting mix of students that they have there. And it was really cool to, hear about the things that they deal with, and I mean, things that you wouldn't think about, like they're at it's an American school, so they're buying their books from here, from the same companies that we purchase our library books from, but then they're having to have them shipped across the world. So it was really interesting to learn from them about what their experience is like, seeing the similarities that we have in our schools and also the differences.
Huh. That's really intriguing. Now, are these schools, would they be considered sort of private schools? Are they sort of, how would they, be sort of compared to what sort of our traditional schools, how we look at schools in the U.S.?
Yeah, I think it feels more like a private school in the way that it's, it's isolated. The international school in Belgrade, I think, is the only American school there in the city, but and they go on different curriculums. Some of them are Common Core. There's a program called the International Baccalaureate Program that
yeah.
a lot of them kind of base their curriculum on, and that allows them to have like accreditation from actually American schools. And for their local students, that's a really good experience for them, because that degree, going to that school, will really benefit them when they're applying to colleges and universities and things like that.
Yes, and I taught in a school that is an international baccalaureate school, so I sort of understand sort of the idea and sort of parts of the philosophy that goes behind it. So that's interesting that the schools sort of do that. Now, Donna asked the question of how many students go to the school and sort of what grades were in the school that you.
Yeah. So at the school that we visited, the International School of Belgrade, I think there were around 320 students, and it was like a preschool to 12 program. They even had like some pre-K classes there, some younger students, all the way up to 12th grade. So, I mean, compared to my school, I'm at a school that's middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade with 1,000 students. Thinking in size, it reminds me a lot more of a smaller private school. Now, the international school in Moscow, the librarian was there. One of their librarians, they have multiple librarians, was there at the conference, and they have, I believe, like 1,200 students from K-12. So it varies depending on the size of the city.
So I guess the next question is, with these international schools, are usually what I'm hearing you say is that they're usually like the only international school within that city, that community, but there may be many other different types of schools, but it's that school that's really teaching an American type of curriculum, right, and teaching English and all of that.
Definitely, and I know there are British international schools and there are American international schools. I've looked into it a little bit, but the group that I met with were pretty much American schools that were international.
That's so cool. Jen, so tell me a little about your trips to Finland and give us some information about that. You saw Finland, and did you see some schools in England too?
Yes. So I was traveling with mostly principals and superintendents, assistant superintendents, and some assistant principals from Massachusetts. And the goal was to, talk with the education people. We met with university officials in schools of education at the School of Education at the University of Helsinki. We also visited a comprehensive school and a high school in Helsinki. So we got to see, it was very short, 2 days, but we did get to see a pretty good example of what their education system is like. And part of the reason that we decided to go to Finland was, of course, because the PISA tests a few years ago put Finland at the top, of education in the world. And so it was interesting to see, on our trip, there were a couple of principals who had said, it's nice to have a librarian on the trip. My librarian wants me to take pictures of the libraries that we visit and that we see at these schools. And I was really interested too. I had done a little bit of reading beforehand. Amanda Hovius, who did a chat, Google Hangout for us last year, and there's another school librarian from Washington who had a Fulbright scholarship in 2011. They've done a few presentations and some writing about school libraries in Finland. And so I wasn't really sure what to expect. I thought, okay, high test scores, greatest, education system in the world. These school libraries are going to blow me away. And they really didn't.
Which is good in a way, because...
Yes. Well, I think it's because, it's just like the United States. You get these fantastic libraries, and then you get libraries that are a little bit behind. And so it just ran the gamut, and we only saw 2 libraries. So again, very small sample of the population. But the conversations I did have at the comprehensive school, and that's about a middle school, the librarian, we met in the library. All of our meetings were in the library spaces. And the former principal there said to me, we really are trying to get the concept of school libraries moving forward in the country. And she was part of a committee, nationally to work on that. Finland has an extremely strong public library system. Mm-hmm. And I think because of that, their school libraries have not necessarily been super strong because they've got such a strong public library system. So kids are using the public library. They have one of the highest circulation rates in the world per capita. So, so it's not that literacy or libraries aren't important. It's just the school libraries haven't had as much attention. Funding is going mainly to the core curriculum. They don't have sports at the comprehensive level, the grades 1 through 9. There's not a lot of school organized sports. You do, town sports.
Right.
There's not a lot of art funding, so you don't have a lot of arts classes. You might have an art class, but you don't have things like band that we might have.
Okay.
That's on a community level too. So it's more about the structure of the society than anything. It's it's not we don't care about our libraries. They spent the public library budget in Finland a couple of years ago was 210 million euros. So they're spending lots of money on their libraries and lots of service. So it was really interesting, and I would say to the principal, occasionally he'd start taking pictures, and I was like, okay, so this is what's really great about this library, but and he would say, well, they don't have computers. Maybe we don't need computers in our library. And I was like, no.
Yeah. So yeah, that goes along with a question that was just asked, which is, did you notice digital tools in the school libraries? I guess this can go for both of you, because that's a very interesting, sort of question out there. Is what are the digital tools that both of these libraries that you saw or you didn't see?
Well, at the comprehensive school, there were about 8 computers in the library. And the library there is staffed by a teacher who's paid extra to work 2 hours a week to basically do circulation and, order books, check in materials, and reshelve materials. So they did have about 8 computers. The library was closed. So when classes are in session, the library is closed because kids are in their classes. The high school that we visited, their library had a computer lab attached to it. We didn't get to see the computer lab. But what I did notice was that the materials were more fiction and kind of reader, in increasing interest in reading and not so much research-based. So if you were doing a research project for your high school class, it didn't necessarily look like you were going to the school library. You were probably going to the public library across the street.
Okay, now, did they have, I guess that brings up the next question of, are these kids walking around with, one-to-one devices in their classrooms to alleviate that need for computers, in the library?
I don't think as much as here. That's something. This is just what we saw, and we got to meet with a group of about 14 of the middle school kids. The technology integration just wasn't. It's not there yet. They definitely, there's smart boards, not the overhead projectors, but the projectors.
Right.
But yeah, kids are not walking around on their iPhones, definitely. They might have them, but they were not. They were outside playing basketball and playing on a playground. They weren't sitting on their iPads during their 15-minute breaks that they were getting.
Tiff, what about you? What did you see in terms of digital tools in the libraries?
Kind of the same thing. Definitely, I felt like from the conversations that I had with the librarians, I felt like we were kind of on the same page. A lot of the tools that I talked about, they had at least heard of, they knew about, knew some teachers were using. Unlike what Jenn described, the library in the school in Belgrade, which there were two libraries. There was the library at the elementary school and then the library at the secondary school as well. They were very robust in their collection. They had both a good fiction selection and nonfiction as well. I think they also have a lot of database resources that are available through the library. So I think that students and teachers are definitely accessing the library as far as research, and the schools there, the libraries are kind of a research hub for sure. They weren't one-to-one. I'm not sure if they were a bring your own device. We only briefly kind of saw, the classrooms and the students, but like Jenn said, when I saw them outside at recess, they were running around and playing.
Right.
Not like at my school, which is one-to-one. When you go outside, you see the students on their devices. So it was different in that way for sure.
Now, I have a question. Jenn, you brought up something that intrigues me, but yet at the same time scares me a little, which is the idea that the schools that you saw in Finland, and I don't know if this is every school, so I don't want to make like a generalization.
Right.
What you were talking about doesn't sound like they have a librarian. They have they really don't have a school librarian, an accredited person to do that. It scares me for the fact that I don't want, people in the U.S. to think like, well, Finland is the #1 school, education system in the nation. We don't need librarians because if they don't have librarians, we don't need it. That part scares me a little, but can you explain a little why, talk a little more about that? What is that sort of about?
So there is a Finnish, on the governmental level, there's a library. They have a library act, and then they also have 3 kind of policy people, all of which are librarians that are overseeing. And so on a government level, on a just societal level, librarians are extremely important. So I think in the schools, I don't know what the history is as far as why libraries in schools, and again, it could be that really strong public library presence, why that hasn't happened in the schools. But they recognize that they need that. That was what the principal that I talked to was really, she said, there are definitely some schools that have full-time librarians.
Okay.
And they have the funding for it. And they recognize that having somebody work 2 hours a week to check in books is not, they don't call that person a librarian,
Okay.
and they know that it's not enough. So it's something that they're looking to the U.S., I think, in some cases for, I think Pasi Sahlberg has said this, he writes a lot about Finnish education, that a lot of what's happening in Finland actually came from observing the United States.
Right.
And they're looking to the U.S., I think, too, as far as what are we doing with our school libraries, and space, what's happening in spaces. Sarah Applegate, the Fulbright fellow that I mentioned earlier, she has a nice PowerPoint online, and she visited, I think, 8 different libraries across the country, so she's got a much better kind of case, different case studies of libraries. And you can see the differences in space. They look at some school libraries look exactly like ours, others don't. But I think the fact that they recognize that school libraries are important and librarians are important to have there, and they're trying to move in that direction, it's just, that's one of those pieces that, I kept saying over and over in my group. I was like, this isn't something that we can learn from. I think this is where we can share with them of what we're doing in school libraries. And test scores, I mean, they're test scores.
We all, I mean,
right. So
we know that as teachers and librarians, we know that.
Yeah.
But
and so many, I mean, one of the things I took away about the Finnish education system was that so much of what is successful there is rooted in, it's in the society. It's, it's free education from pre-kindergarten all the way through a PhD. It's free lunches for every child.
Yeah.
So there's so much that, like I said, it's on a society level that
it's so valued. It's so
exactly.
there's what I'm hearing is the poverty. That factor doesn't factor in to the equation like it does here in other places.
Right.
I mean, Tiff, can you talk a little about your experiences too, and how, from a societal standpoint, that's sort of what you learned?
Well, I think it was pretty different, and I didn't go to any Serbian schools, and I think that would have been a completely different experience. But for the most part, at the international schools, I think that the students are coming from pretty affluent families. Either their parents are business people that are from America working in an international school, or they're diplomats' children, and so that's definitely something very different. As far as funding in the schools, from what I heard from the librarians, they weren't having the budget issues that I know I'm having. So that was very eye-opening and just very different. Hearing them talk about their struggles versus what I experience here, and what I'm sure other countries are experiencing. It's kind of a different type of environment for sure.
So, and that actually is funny because that was a question that was just asked, which is where does the educational funding come from that you know of? I mean, you're saying it's a sort of a private type of setting, so Tiff, was it that the parents pay tuition for their kids to go to the school? And
I have no idea, and that's a question I wish I would have asked. But I was just kind of shocked when they were talking about the things that they have and the funding that they have. I was so overwhelmed by it that I didn't even stop and say, where is this money coming from?
Now, Jenn, I mean, that's sort of the same with you. Is it tax-based in Finland?
Mm-hmm.
It's all tax-based?
It is. And my understanding, I think it was the comprehensive school, the first one that we visited, if I understood correctly, all schools get the same funding per child.
Oh, okay.
And it's basically all public schools. I think there might be 2 private schools in all of Finland or something.
Okay.
I mean, there are very few private schools. It's not like here. It's not like England or the
Right.
United Kingdom. It's all public education for the most part. So it's all tax-based, and they're getting their funding, per pupil. It's something like $7,500, roughly, per student. I think I just read something in the U.S. it might be 8,500, and there it's 7,500. So, and a much smaller, I think
Right, population.
much smaller population. So yeah, it's all public, which again might be could be the difference of the public. If you have a public library,
Right, then you have I see.
how that's integrated. Yeah.
Well, I thought it was interesting what you said about not only the library situation, but the arts as well. And
Yeah.
Mhm.
it sounds like what happens at their school is pretty classroom based. It happens in the classroom, and there's not. We have so much extra for our
Right.
students
Well,
because we're trying to expose them to so much.
And if our students wanted to join a band or play soccer in their community, they usually have to pay for it. Whereas again, I think this is all free in their communities. And so when our schools can provide band and soccer and basketball for free, it gives kids opportunities and experiences that they might not otherwise have or couldn't afford.
I think you're right, and I think that's sort of interesting, the whole idea. Now, the other question asked was, are the students bilingual? Are you finding that most of the students that you saw are bilingual? They speak English and Finnish, or English in the languages that you were mentioning.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this was my first trip to Europe, and it was really interesting, just not only in the school setting, but just in Serbia, in Belgrade. So many people speak English, and for me, it was kind of like, oh, I'm this dumb American who just speaks English, and all of these other people speak all of these different languages. I think a lot of that for us has to do with the level of isolation that we have, being so far removed from
Right.
the rest of the world. But I mean, definitely, is there anyone over there who just speaks one language? I mean,
No, I think in a way you're right.
Yeah.
We have one more question, and then I'm realizing, oh God, our half hour's gone really quick. So I'm going to ask you actually probably 2 or 3 more questions. But the one that from the audience was, did you see collaboration with the librarian and the classroom teacher? I mean, that's a big thing that we push here, is the whole idea of collaboration. Is that something that you were seeing pushed in your, in the schools that you visited, both of you guys?
it was what I saw, at least at the international school in Belgrade, is very similar. It was very relatable to what I have here. Now, what's interesting is a lot of the teacher and library positions over there, they're fairly short term, because if it's an American teacher coming over to work, they may make a year-to-year commitment. And I think a big part of being in the library is establishing relationships for collaboration.
Right.
So that was something that I found interesting. I'm interested, Jen, to hear about collaboration between the public library.
Yeah, me too.
I did ask about that. They said the public librarians are very used to having students come in and use the library, and occasionally the public librarians might collaborate with a teacher, but it wasn't happening systematically. But it definitely was not unheard of for the kids to go to the public library after school, and they were, they had materials ready and database access and stuff. And I was also going to add to the last question, in Finland, you learn Finnish, Swedish, and English. Those are the three mandatory languages that you have to take through school. And then a lot of students will learn I think she was 14, one of the girls we met spoke 5 languages.
Wow. Yeah, our kids like know one, barely. So I guess the last question in this, because is what was your biggest takeaway from your experiences? What was your biggest takeaway? What is the biggest thing you want us to learn from tonight, from what you got to experience? What do you want everybody else to know about your experience? Like what you learned.
I think just that there's this whole different world out there of international schools, and if you have the opportunity to, apply for that and give it a try, it's so cool, and not only a amazing life experience for you, but I also think of it in terms of, even if I were to just go for a few years and be able to bring that experience back to my coworkers and to my students, it's amazing. It totally blew my mind to see what is going on in education and just life in general outside of our normal everyday American life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would say, I mean, this was such a great, amazing trip. Looking at education in both Helsinki and in London, and it was, I mean, the morning we flew into London, it was just such a drastic difference from what we had seen in Helsinki, that, especially as a librarian, to step back and kind of look at it more holistically, from this perspective of education as a whole, much bigger than just the library. But then to see, what's happening in other libraries, that the libraries that I visited were so similar to things that we see here, that, it's not this country has the greatest libraries and we should all learn from them. It's that we all have something to share about what we're doing well and what we can learn from. And that was something, one of the librarians I met in London, I still have her email address. I need to follow up with her, but she was turning over 600 kids a day in her library. So there's so much that we can learn from, and I think that was, that was my big takeaway. And that as a librarian, we get to see so many students, and from my perspective, I get to work with so many teachers, that if we're not curious, the people we work with are not going to be curious. And so when we can be curious about the world and say, oh, I just visited this great place and here's this great book about this place, it gets our kids and our patrons interested in that too.
So what is the one thing, and one more question, because I just have to ask this, and then we'll stop, even though we're over. And it is the Seton Hall basketball game going on right now, so I do want to get back to it. We are up by 2 right now, just so you know. So I feel like maybe it's a good thing if we keep talking, because then we won't go down. But what is the one thing that you think, like when you went there, what was the one thing that the librarians wanted to learn from you, that they were all like, wanted to learn about American libraries? Or what was the one thing that you thought, hey, we as Americans can bring to help these schools with?
I don't think there was anything specific other than the fact that we're at the core, we're all very similar as librarians, and we love to learn. And as much as I was able to share in the sessions that I presented to them, I learned so much from them in return. And I think that's, as librarians, that's what we are. That's who we are. That's what we do. And so there are so many great things for us to be able to share with each other. And even though we often can feel isolated or withdrawn because we may be the only person in the building taking those opportunities to get together and collaborate and share, it's always really, really great.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you guys for tonight. Now, see, I shouldn't have talked. We're now down. See, I told you if we leave, I go down. 2 seconds and they're, Xavier's up again. Thank you guys tonight for your great conversation. It was so interesting and I learned so much. That we will be there'll be a Twitter chat going on sort of for the next half hour. So if you guys, have any questions for Jenn or Tiffany, write on the hashtag ISTELib and, somebody will get back to you. And so we'll be sort of answering questions throughout the night or discussing this topic further. Next month, we're very excited. We haven't picked a date yet. That'll be coming out soon. But we're going to have Sherry Glick come on and talk about sort of her battle of the books that she does. Nice. So that should be really exciting. Our president-elect of the ISTE Librarian Network, she does this really cool battle of the books thing, so that should be really exciting to talk about that. I can't thank you guys enough for coming on tonight, and I will see you guys soon. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.